There's a special kind of loneliness that comes when the children you raised forget to call. Lowell Brantley knew that feeling well at 65, he'd spent more birthdays alone than he cared to count. When he saw a foreclosed mansion listed for $10, he bought it without hesitation. The house was falling apart, hidden in the pines with a rusted proc plane sitting in the yard like a forgotten memory. He thought it would be a quiet place to live out his days. Then he found the hidden panel in the study. Inside were sealed letters, old flight maps, and a voice recorder. The pilot who once lived there had flown secret rescue missions overseas and left behind one final message for a daughter he never found. What Lowell discovered next would change everything. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Lowell Brantley locked the door to his repair shop for the last time, he stood on the sidewalk for a long while, keys heavy in his palm. 42 years he'd owned that building on Maple Street in Riverside, Oregon. 42 years of oil-stained concrete floors, the smell of soldering flux, and the comfortable weight of tools that fit his hands, like old friends. He'd bought the shop in 1983, right after Eleanor died. The kids had been so young then: Malcolm barely 10, Diane 7, Curtis just 3 years old. A single father with 3 grieving children, and a mortgage he could barely afford. The repair shop had been his salvation and his prison both. While other fathers coached Little League or took weekend camping trips, Lowell had been bent over circuit boards and engine blocks, teaching himself to fix everything from toasters to lawn mowers to the occasional television set. The kids had done their homework at the workbench in back, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and the metallic tang of machine oil. He'd taught them all how to use a multimeter, how to diagnose a problem through patience and logic. Malcolm had been methodical, following instructions to the letter. Diane had been quick and intuitive, often fixing things before Lowell could explain what was wrong. Curtis had mostly just wanted to be near his father, content to hand him tools and ask endless questions about how things worked. Where had those children gone? Malcolm was 42 now, a corporate lawyer in Seattle with a corner office and a view of Elliott Bay. He called every few months, conversations brief and professional, asking about Lowell's health, the way you might inquire about a client's portfolio. Diane had made a fortune in commercial real estate development, always flying between Portland and San Francisco, her voice on the phone perpetually distracted by the sound of car doors closing and airport announcements. Curtis, the baby, had followed tech money to Austin, working as some kind of consultant for startups. He sent text messages on holidays, short, efficient, asking nothing. They all had children of their own now. Lowell had 5 grandchildren whose faces he knew mainly from Christmas cards and Facebook photos that Phyllis next door helped him look at on her computer. Malcolm's 2 boys were teenagers already. Diane's daughter was in middle school. Curtis had twin girls who'd just started kindergarten. Lowell had been invited to exactly 3 of their birthday parties in the last 5 years. He didn't blame them. Not really. He'd been there for every scraped knee and school play when they were young, but he'd been distant too, exhausted from work, emotionally hollowed out by Eleanor's absence. He provided for them, kept them safe, made sure they had what they needed. But had he really known them? Had he asked the right questions, listened to the answers that mattered? The repair shop's ledger sat in a cardboard box in his truck now, that old leather-bound book where he'd recorded every job for 4 decades. Names and addresses, repair descriptions, amounts paid. Sometimes he'd written little notes to himself. Mrs. Patterson's radio, her husband's favorite, handle with care, or Jacobson Boys guitar amp first gig this weekend, priority. The ledger was a map of his entire adult life, and reading through it was like walking through a graveyard of small kindnesses that nobody remembered. He'd sold the shop to a young couple who wanted to turn it into a coffee roastery. They'd been polite and enthusiastic, talking about exposed brick and artisanal blends. They'd promised to keep the old sign up, the one that said, "Brantley's Repair, we fix what's broken." Lowell had nodded and signed the papers and taken their check to the bank. The money wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for what, he wasn't entirely sure. That night, alone in his small rental house on the edge of town, Lowell had sat at his kitchen table with a bottle of Eleanor's favorite wine. He'd kept one in the back of the cupboard for 24 years, and scrolled through real estate listings on his laptop. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. Just looking. That's when he'd found it. For a closed property tax default sale, $10 minimum bid, the listing read. Victorian mansion, 4,200 SQFT, 3.5 acres, rural Washington state. As is, where is. Property includes outbuildings and personal property. No showings, no inspections, sold sight unseen. The photos showed a house that had clearly been grand once, maybe 70 or 80 years ago. 3 stories of weathered wood siding, a wraparound porch sagging in the middle, windows dark and vacant. The yard had gone wild, Douglas firs pressing in close, blackberry vines consuming what might have once been a garden, and there, in the front yard like some bizarre lawn ornament, sat a small proc plane, a Cessna, maybe from the 1962nd, its paint faded to gray, its wheels sunk into the earth. Next to the plane was an old muscle car, a Dodge Charger from the looks of it, sitting on flat tires under a Douglas fir. The listing said the previous owner had died with no heirs and substantial tax debt. The county had foreclosed and was selling it for whatever they could get, just to clear the books. Minimum bid, $10. Lowell had stared at that listing for an hour, pouring himself glass after glass of wine he didn't really taste. The house looked like the physical embodiment of loneliness, abandoned and forgotten, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. He thought about his empty rental, his empty shop, his empty calendar, stretching forward into an empty retirement. At 11:30 that night, slightly drunk and possibly stupid, he'd created an account on the county auction website and placed a bid, $10. He'd won. The paperwork had taken 3 weeks. Nobody else had bid. Nobody wanted a falling down mansion, hours from anywhere, full of someone else's possessions and problems. But Lowell signed every form, paid every fee, and on a gray October morning, he'd loaded his truck with everything he owned, which wasn't much, and driven north. The mansion was worse in person. Better too, somehow. Worse because the photos hadn't captured the scale of neglect, the way the porch steps felt spongy underfoot, the broken windows on the 3rd floor, the smell of rot and animal nests. Better because it was real, solid, a problem he could maybe solve with his hands and his tools, and his time. He'd walked the perimeter that first day, taking inventory. The proc plane was a Cessna 182, late 1962 model. Probably hadn't flown in 30 years. The muscle car was a 1969 Dodge Charger, buried under pine needles and bird droppings, but possibly salvageable. The outbuildings included a workshop with a caved-in roof, and a garage that leaned dramatically to one side. Inside, the mansion was a time capsule. Furniture covered in dusty sheets, decades-old calendars on walls, kitchen cabinets full of dishes and glasses. Whoever had lived here had simply stopped, as if they'd walked out one day and never returned. That first night, Lowell had unrolled his sleeping bag on the dusty hardwood floor of what must have once been a parlor. He'd lain awake listening to the house settle and creak, to the wind moving through the pines outside, and he'd wondered what exactly he thought he was doing here. The answer had come to him just before sleep. He was looking for something. He didn't know what, yet, but he'd know it when he found it. Lowell spent the first week just trying to make the mansion livable. He patched the worst of the roof leaks with tarps and duct tape, cleared mouse nests from the kitchen cabinets, and got the ancient furnace coughing back to life. The water ran brown for 2 days before clearing, and the electricity worked in some rooms, but not others. It was the kind of project that would have overwhelmed a younger man, but Lowell had spent 42 years solving problems, And this was just another problem, with 100 smaller problems nested inside it. He worked methodically, room by room, starting with the basics: kitchen functional, bathroom usable, bedroom habitable. Everything else could wait. On the 8th day, he finally made it to the study. It was a beautiful room, or had been once. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves lined 3 walls, packed with volumes on aviation, history, geography. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface buried under layers of dust and scattered papers. The 4th wall was covered in framed photographs, planes, airstrips, groups of men in flight suits, exotic locations Lowell couldn't immediately identify. The desk drawers were locked, but the keys hung on a hook beside the door, labeled in neat handwriting, "Study Captain H. Merrick." So now he had a name, Captain Howard Merrick. Lowell spent the morning carefully going through the desk, flight manuals, navigation charts, logbooks filled with entries in precise script. The handwriting had the disciplined quality of military training. Every letter formed exactly, no wasted motion. The dates ranged from 1968 to 1989, documenting flights to places that made Lowell reach for an atlas. Vientiane, Kinshasa, Cartagena, Phnom Penh. Not pleasure trips, not commercial routes. These were flights to conflict zones, disaster areas, places where normal people didn't go by choice. The bookshelf behind the desk caught his attention around noon. Something about it looked wrong. The spacing was off, the back wall not quite flush with the others. Lowell ran his hand along the seam, where shelf met wall, and felt a draft of cool air. He pressed. The panel shifted. His heart rate picked up as he worked his fingers into the gap and pulled. The entire section swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a compartment about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. Inside were 3 cardboard document boxes, stacked neatly, each labeled with dates. Lowell lifted out the first box and carried it to the desk. His hands were shaking slightly. He felt like he was opening someone's coffin, violating something sacred. But Captain Merrick was dead. The house was his now, and whatever was in these boxes was part of the mystery he'd bought for $10. The first thing he found was a leather-bound flight log, different from the ones in the desk. This one was personal, detailed, with entries that read more like diary entries than navigation records. The 12th of November 1972, flew into Vientiane against orders. Evacuation necessary, despite official channels saying otherwise. Carried 23 refugees, mostly children. Command will be furious, but some things matter more than protocol. The 3rd of March 1975, Saigon, falling faster than anyone admits. Made 3 trips today, packed them in like sardines, way over weight limits. If we'd gone down, we all would have died. But we didn't. 47 people out. 47 people who get to live. The 19th of August 1984, Ethiopia. The famine is worse than the news shows. Flew medical supplies into Korem. The children's faces will haunt me forever. How can the world just watch this happen? Lowell read entry after entry, watching Captain Merrick's life unfold in cramped handwriting and fading ink. This was a man who had spent decades flying into hell to pull people out, unauthorized missions, humanitarian work that skirted regulations and risked court-martial. A man who had chosen danger and conscience over safety and rules. But it was the letters that broke Lowell's heart. They were bundled together with a rubber band that disintegrated when he touched it. 47 envelopes, each one addressed to Annette with different addresses, all crossed out. None of them had ever been mailed. Lowell opened the first one, dated 1970. Dear Annette, you're 3 years old now, and I wonder if you look like your mother or like me. I wonder if your new parents let you play in the dirt, or if they keep you in fancy dresses. I wonder if you're happy. I hope you're happy. That's all I wanted, for you a better life than I could give you at 19 years old, with nothing but a fresh pilot's license and a head full of dreams. Your mother was braver than me. She held you, named you, and then let you go to a family who could give you everything. I couldn't even do that. I left before you were born because I was scared and stupid and thought running away was the same as being strong. I'm searching for you now. I've hired an investigator, and he says the adoption records are sealed, but there has to be a way. I need you to know I didn't forget you. I never forgot you. Love, your father. Lowell set the letter down and closed his eyes. He thought about Malcolm, Diane, and Curtis. He thought about all the times he'd been physically present but emotionally absent, exhausted from work, hollowed out by grief and responsibility. He'd never abandoned them, but had he really been there? The voice recorder was at the bottom of the second box, an old reel-to-reel portable unit from the 1980 seconds, the kind reporters used to use. 3 tapes were labeled with dates and locations. Lowell found an outlet, plugged it in, and loaded the first take. Static, then a click, then Howard Merrick's voice filled the study. December 1988. I'm recording this because I need to say it out loud, and there's nobody here to listen. I've spent 21 years looking for her. 21 years of private investigators and false leads, and doors that won't open. The adoption agency closed. The records are sealed by court order. I've hit every wall there is to hit. A pause. The sound of breathing. But I keep flying. Everywhere I go, every mission, I look at the children and wonder if they're like her. If she's happy somewhere. If she's loved. If she thinks about me at all. Probably not. Probably she doesn't even know I exist. Maybe that's better. Another pause. Longer. I saved 43 people in Cambodia last month. Unauthorized flight during the ceasefire that wasn't really a ceasefire. I could lose my license, maybe go to prison, but they're alive. 43 people who would have died. They're alive now. Does that balance the scales? Does saving strangers make up for abandoning your own child? The tape clicked off. Lowell sat in the gathering darkness of the study, surrounded by the evidence of Howard Merrick's life, the heroism and the guilt, the rescues and the regrets, the man who had saved hundreds, but couldn't save himself from the hole in his heart. He thought about his own children, grown and distant, living lives he barely understood. He thought about the years he'd spent fixing other people's broken things, while his own family quietly fractured. And he made a decision. He would find Annette. He would finish what Howard Merrick had started, not because it would bring Howard back or change the past, but because some stories deserved an ending, and some people deserved to know they were loved, even if it came too late. The library in the nearest town was 40 minutes away, a brick building that looked like it hadn't changed since 1970. Lowell arrived when it opened on Monday morning, carrying a notebook and Howard Merrick's flight log. The librarian, a woman in her 70s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, showed him to the computer terminals in the reference section without asking questions. He started with the basics. Howard Merrick, Captain, U.S. Air Force. The search results came quickly: military records, service citations, a brief obituary from 2018. Captain Howard Allen Merrick, 81, died Tuesday at Evergreen Veterans Hospital in Seattle. Merrick served in the U.S. Air Force from 1965 to 1990, including multiple tours in Southeast Asia. After his military service, he worked as an independent contractor for humanitarian organizations, flying relief missions in conflict zones. He is survived by no immediate family. Service is private. No immediate family. The words sat heavy in Lowell's chest. He dug deeper. Military records showed commendations for service in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. After retirement, there were references to flights for organizations like Doctors Without Borders and the International Red Cross, though nothing official or detailed. Howard had operated in the gaps, apparently, flying missions that needed doing but didn't fit into official channels. The adoption agency business card had been tucked inside one of the letters, its edges soft with age. Cascade Family Services, Portland, Oregon. A phone number with a prefix Lowell didn't recognize, probably disconnected decades ago. He called anyway. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. The librarian helped him search historical business records. Cascade Family Services had closed in 1995. Its files transferred to the Oregon Department of Human Services. Adoption records, she explained, were typically sealed for 99 years, unless a court ordered them opened. You'd need to be immediate family, she said gently, or have legal standing. Lowell thanked her and spent another hour searching before driving back to the mansion. The road wound through dense pine forests, past small farms and houses set far apart. He'd bought milk and bread in town, the beginnings of actually living in the house, rather than just camping there. His phone rang as he pulled into the driveway. Malcolm's name on the screen. Dad. Malcolm's voice was professional, distant. Just checking in. How are you settling into the new place? It's coming along, Lowell said. He climbed out of the truck, phone wedged against his shoulder, and grabbed the grocery bags. Lots of work to do, but it's good work. I still don't understand why you bought a house in the middle of nowhere for $10. That seems impulsive? I was going to say concerning. Lowell unlocked the front door and stepped into the entryway. Afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes in golden shafts. I needed a project, Malcolm. Something to do with my time. You could have moved closer to one of us. Seattle's nice. You could see the grandkids more. Could he? Or would he just be closer to the same polite distance, the same dutiful phone calls, and obligatory holiday visits? How are the boys? Lowell asked, changing the subject. Good. Busy. Preston made the honor roll again, and Dylan's playing varsity basketball now. That's wonderful. Tell them I'm proud of them. A pause. You could tell them yourself, Dad. They do have phones. The rebuke was gentle, but clear. Lowell set the groceries on the kitchen counter. You're right. I should call them more. We all should do better, Malcolm said, and there was something in his voice, a crack in the professional veneer, a hint of the boy who used to hand his father tools in the repair shop. I've been meaning to visit, but work has been crazy. This merger, it's fine, Malcolm, I understand. Another pause. Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if you expect us to be distant now. Like you've already decided that's how it is. The words stung because they were true. Lowell had accepted the distance as inevitable, maybe even deserved. He'd failed them somehow, hadn't he? Been too tired, too sad, too focused on keeping them fed and clothed to really see them. I don't want that, Lowell said quietly. Then maybe we could try harder. All of us. I'd like that. The conversation ended with promises to talk again soon, the kind of promises they'd been making for years. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the tone in Malcolm's voice. Maybe it was Lowell's own shifting perspective, shaped by reading Howard Merrick's desperate letters to a daughter he'd never found. That evening, Lowell played the second take. Howard's voice was rougher this time, dated 1982. Just got back from Ethiopia. Korem refugee camp. The famine there is beyond anything I've seen, and I've seen a lot. We flew in medical supplies, but it's not enough. It's never enough. There were thousands of children, and their eyes. A long pause. Every child I helped, I wonder if they're like her, like Annette. I wonder if she's 13 now, maybe starting high school. Does she think about me? Does she even know I exist? Another pause, the sound of papers rustling. The investigator found another lead. A family in Tacoma named Foster who adopted a girl in 1967. Theodore and June Foster, missionaries. But they won't talk to me, and the courts won't help. I'm starting to think I'm chasing a ghost. But what else do I have? If I stop looking, what am I? The tape ended with a click that echoed in the empty study. Laura rewound it and played it again. Theodore and June Foster, Tacoma, missionaries. It was the first concrete lead he'd found in Howard's papers, a name attached to the faceless Annette of the letters. He opened his laptop and started searching. Theodore Foster and June Foster, Tacoma, Washington. The obituaries came up within minutes. Theodore had died in 2003, June in 2011. Both had been missionaries who spent years working overseas before retiring to Tacoma. Their obituary mentioned surviving family, a daughter, Annie Foster. Lowell's hands stilled on the keyboard. Annie Foster. Could it be that simple? Could Annette have kept her first name, just gained the Foster surname? He searched for Annie Foster in Tacoma. Nothing. He tried broader searches, Annie Foster, Washington. Too many results. He added, age 58, based on the 1967 birth year from the letters. There. Annie Foster Gaines. Bend, Oregon. Age 58. Occupation, hospice nurse. Her Facebook page was semi-public, showing a smiling woman with graying brown hair and kind eyes, photos of grandchildren and hiking trails, book club meetings and charity runs. A normal life, a happy life, by all appearances. Lowell stared at her picture for a long time. This woman might be Howard Merrick's daughter. This woman might have spent her entire life not knowing that her biological father had spent decades searching for her, flying into war zones and disasters, saving hundreds of strangers, while never finding the one person he needed to save. Should he contact her? Did he have that right? What if she didn't want to know? What if opening this door only brought pain? But then he thought about Howard's voice on those tapes. The quiet desperation, the hope that never quite died. He thought about the sealed letters that had never been sent, the love that had never been delivered. Some things deserve to be known, even if they hurt. The drive to Olympia took 3 hours through rain that started light and turned heavy. Lowell had called ahead to the state archives, explaining that he was researching a deceased veteran's family history. They'd been polite but non-committal about what records might be available. The building was modern and institutional, all concrete and glass. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and climate control. A woman at the reference desk looked up as he approached, her nameplate reading Phyllis Kwan. I called yesterday, Lowell said, about adoption records from the 1960 seconds. Phyllis nodded, her expression sympathetic. I remember. I pulled what I could, but I need to be honest with you, most adoption records from that era are sealed. Privacy laws. Even with the adoptive parents deceased, we can't release identifying information without a court order. I understand. Lowell paused, choosing his words. The man who owned my house spent his whole life looking for his daughter. He died without finding her. I thought maybe I could finish what he started. Something shifted in Phyllis's face. That's kind. Most people wouldn't bother. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. I was adopted in 1963. I didn't find my birth mother until I was 52, and by then she'd been dead for 3 years. I understand what it means, not knowing. She led him to a research room, and returned 20 minutes later with a thin folder. This is what I can give you without breaking any laws. It's not much. The file contained a summary sheet from Cascade Family Services. No names, just case numbers and dates. But one entry matched. Female infant, born the 14th of March, 1967, placed with adoptive family, April 1967. Adoptive parents listed only as T. Foster and J. Foster, Tacoma. Wah. That's her, Lowell said quietly. That's Annette. Phyllis sat down across from him. The file notes that the adoption was closed, meaning no contact between birth and adoptive families. That was common then. People thought it was cleaner that way. But she'd be what? 58 now. If she wanted to find information about her birth parents, could she? She could petition the court. Sometimes they'll open records if both parties consent, or if there's a compelling reason. But she'd have to initiate it. Lowell thanked her, and drove back in darkness. The windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm. His mind was full of questions. How do you tell someone their biological father spent his life searching for them? How do you deliver love that arrived 50 years too late? Back at the mansion he made coffee, and returned to the study. There had to be more, something he'd missed. He went through the document boxes again, more carefully this time, and at the bottom of the third box, he found a manila envelope marked Emergency Contact. Inside was a photograph. The woman in the picture was young, maybe 20, with dark hair and frightened eyes. She held an infant wrapped in a hospital blanket, the baby's face just visible, tiny and perfect. On the back, in Howard's handwriting, Annette Marie, the 16th of March, 1967, 2 days old. She has your eyes. Below that, in different ink, added later, Rebecca, wherever you are, I hope you found peace. You were braver than both of us. Lowell stared at the photograph for a long time. This was Annette as an infant, held by her birth mother Rebecca. This was the moment before everything changed, before the adoption, before Howard spent decades searching, before the life that might have been became the life that was. He thought about his own children, about holding them as infants after Eleanor died, the weight of them, the responsibility, the terror that he wouldn't be enough. At least he'd stayed. At least he'd tried. His phone rang. Diane's name. Dad? Malcolm said you two talked. We did. He said you're doing okay out there. In the middle of nowhere, there was something sharp in Diane's voice, an edge that had been there since she was a teenager. She'd taken Eleanor's death the hardest, had built walls that never quite came down. I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you? Busy. I've got 3 properties closing this week and a zoning board meeting tomorrow that's going to be a nightmare. Sounds stressful. It's just work. A pause. Malcolm said, maybe we should visit. All of us. Make a weekend of it or something. You don't have to do that. I know we don't have to. Maybe we want to. But she didn't sound like she wanted to. She sounded obligated, like this was another item on her schedule between the property closings and the zoning meeting. Diane, Lowell said carefully. Do you remember when you were about 8, and you took apart the toaster to see how it worked? Silence. You got it all apart, but you couldn't get it back together. You were crying because you thought I'd be angry. But I wasn't angry. I was proud that you'd been curious enough to try. Why are you bringing this up? Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being curious. About everything. You just moved forward, built walls, kept going. That's not fair. Maybe not. But I've been thinking a lot lately about the things we don't say. The conversations we never have, because we're all too busy or too tired or too scared. Another silence. Longer this time. When Diane spoke again, her voice was softer. I don't know how to talk to you, Dad. I haven't known for years. I know. That's my fault more than yours. It's both our faults. After Mom died, you were just gone. Even when you were right there, you were gone. And we learned to not need you, because needing you hurt too much. The words landed like stones, true and heavy and painful. I'm sorry, Lowell said. I did the best I could, but my best wasn't good enough. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. Then maybe we should stop pretending. The conversation ended without resolution, just a promise to talk again soon. Lowell sat in the dark study, the photograph of infant Annette still in his hand, and wondered if it was possible to repair relationships that had been broken for so long. That night, he read more of Howard's letters, watching the progression from hope to desperation to resignation. The later letters, written in the 1992s and 2000s, had a different quality, less frantic searching, more philosophical reflection. One letter from 1995 stopped him cold. Dear Annette, I'm 58 now. The age you'll be when you read this, if you ever do. I've been thinking about all the missions I flew, all the people I saved, hundreds of lives, maybe thousands, if you count the indirect effects. But I couldn't save us. I couldn't save the relationship we never had. Sometimes I wonder if I kept searching because finding you mattered, or because the search itself gave me purpose. What would I do if I found you? Would you even want to know me? Maybe you're better off with the mystery than the reality of a man who ran away before you were born and spent the rest of his life trying to run back. I hope you've been happy. That's all I ever wanted. Your father, who loved you from a distance. Lowell folded the letter carefully and added it back to the stack. Tomorrow, he would make a decision about Annie Foster Gaines. Tomorrow he would figure out how to tell her that her biological father had loved her enough to spend his entire life searching, even if he'd never found her. Tonight, he would sit with Howard's ghost and think about fatherhood and failure and the 1,000 ways love could go undelivered. Finding Annie Foster Gaines had been easier than Lowell expected. Her nursing license was public record, her address listed in the phone directory that still existed online. She lived on Cascade Drive in Bend, a modest ranch house with a garden visible on Google Street View. Her life was right there, documented in pixels and public records, married to Gerald Gaines for 32 years, 3 adult children, work history at St. Charles Medical Center, in hospice care. The hard part was deciding what to do with that information. Lowell spent 2 days composing drafts of a letter he never sent. Each version felt wrong, too casual, too formal, too presumptuous. How do you tell someone their entire origin story might be different than they thought? How do you deliver a dead man's love without seeming like a crazy stranger? He researched Annie instead, trying to understand who she was before potentially upending her life. Her Facebook posts were kind and thoughtful. She shared articles about end-of-life care and dignity in death. She posted pictures of hikes with her husband, book club gatherings, her grandchildren's school plays. There was no indication she knew anything about Howard Merrick, or that she'd ever searched for her biological parents. Maybe that meant she was content with not knowing. Maybe the mystery didn't haunt her the way it had haunted Howard. On the 3rd day, Curtis showed up unannounced. Lowell was in the garage, trying to assess whether the Dodge Charger was salvageable, when he heard a car in the driveway. Curtis climbed out of a rental sedan, looking around at the mansion and the overgrown grounds, with an expression somewhere between concern and disbelief. "So this is it," Curtis said. "The $10 mansion. This is it." Lowell wiped his hands on a rag. "What brings you up from Austin?" "Conference in Portland. Thought I'd drive over and see what kind of trouble you've gotten yourself into." They stood there awkwardly, father and son separated by 35 years, and a distance neither knew how to cross. Curtis had Eleanor's features, her dark eyes, her quick smile, though he wasn't smiling now. "It's bigger than I thought," Curtis said finally. "And more. Falling apart? I was going to say ambitious." Lowell gave him the tour. The restored kitchen, the patched roof, the study where he'd found Howard's belongings. Curtis asked questions about the structure and the repairs, staying safely in the practical realm of load-bearing walls and electrical systems. It was only when they were standing in the study, surrounded by Howard's photographs and flight logs, that Curtis said what he'd really come to say. "Malcolm and Diane are worried about you. They think you're having some kind of crisis. Are you worried?" Curtis picked up one of the aviation books from the desk, flipped through it without reading. "I don't know what I think. You sell the shop, buy a mansion for $10, move to the middle of nowhere. It's not exactly normal retirement behavior. Maybe normal isn't what I need." "What do you need, Dad?" The question hung in the air between them. Lowell thought about Howard's letters, about decades spent searching for something that might not want to be found. He thought about his own children, close enough to touch, but impossibly far away. "I need to understand some things," Lowell said. "About fatherhood, about the choices we make, and the consequences that follow us." Curtis set the book down. "Is this about Mom? It's about all of us. The way we've been with each other since she died. The way Lowell paused, searching for words. The way I was there but not really there. You said it yourself once. I remember. You were maybe 14, angry about something I'd missed. You said I was always physically present but emotionally absent. I was a kid. I didn't know what I was talking about. You knew exactly what you were talking about. Curtis moved to the window, looking out at the proc plane in the yard. You did your best. You kept us fed, kept a roof over our heads. That's more than a lot of kids get. But it wasn't enough, was it? Keeping you alive isn't the same as helping you live. The silence stretched. Finally Curtis said, "Who lived here?" "Before you?" Lowell told him. "About Howard Merrick, the pilot who'd flown humanitarian missions for decades. About the daughter given up for adoption, the lifetime spent searching, the letters never sent. About finding Annie Foster Gaines and not knowing whether to tell her." Curtis listened without interrupting, and when Lowell finished, he was quiet for a long time. "That's heavy," he said finally. "That's a lot to carry for someone you never met." "I know. So why are you carrying it?" "Because nobody else will. Because he deserves to have his story finished. Because his daughter deserves to know she was loved, even if it comes 50 years too late." Curtis turned from the window. "And what about your kids? What about us? What about you? You're spending all this energy on a stranger's family story, trying to solve a dead man's regrets. But what about your own regrets? What about fixing what's broken right in front of you?" The words stung because they were true. Lowell had thrown himself into Howard's mystery, partly because it was easier than facing his own failures. Solving someone else's problems required research and persistence. Solving his own required vulnerability and risk. "You're right," Lowell said. "You're absolutely right. I didn't come here to fight with you. I know. You came here because you care, even if we don't know how to show it very well." Curtis laughed, a short, bitter sound. "We're terrible at this, all of us. The Brantleys, emotionally stunted for 3 generations. It doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't it, Dad? I barely know you." "Not really. I know you can fix anything mechanical. I know you worked yourself half to death to raise us. I know you loved Mum so much her death nearly destroyed you. But I don't know what you dream about. I don't know what scares you. I don't know what you wanted to be before life happened, and you became just Dad." Lowell sat down in Howard's desk chair. "I wanted to be an engineer, design bridges. Your mother and I met in college, got married too young, and then she got pregnant with Malcolm. So I took whatever work I could find, and the repair shop was what I could afford. It was supposed to be temporary. 42 years, temporary. Life doesn't care about your plans." Curtis pulled up another chair. "Tell me about her. About Mum. Not the stuff we know. Not the cancer and the hospital. Tell me something from before." So Lowell did. He told Curtis about Eleanor's laugh, how it started quiet, and built until she was doubled over, gasping. About how she sang off-key in the car, and didn't care. About the way she'd leave notes in his lunch pail, little drawings and jokes that made the hard days bearable. About how she'd wanted to travel to Ireland and never got the chance. They talked for 2 hours, father and son, saying things that should have been said decades ago. It wasn't resolution too much damage for that, but it was a start. When Curtis left, promising to visit again soon, Lowell felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because connection, even difficult connection, felt like oxygen after years of holding his breath. Heavier because he could see now how much work remained, how many conversations still needed to happen. That night, he found the commendation medal in a shoebox under Howard's bed. Tarnished silver, worn ribbon, citation for extraordinary service. Lowell read the full text, detailing flights that had saved 83 civilians under dangerous conditions. Official reprimand, unofficial protection. A career saved by a commanding officer who understood that some rules deserved to be broken. The photograph from the ceremony showed Howard standing alone, No family beside him, his eyes hollow despite the honor. Lowell understood that look. Now. It was the look of a man who'd saved the world, but couldn't save himself. Lowell read through the remaining letters in chronological order, tracking Howard's emotional journey like a map of internal territory. The progression was stark, when seen all at once: hope giving way to desperation, desperation to resignation, resignation to a kind of philosophical acceptance that never quite masked the underlying griefs. The early letters from the 1970 seconds were energetic, almost optimistic. Howard wrote about leads he was chasing, investigators he'd hired, agencies he'd contacted. He wrote about his work, the missions, the people he'd helped. There was a sense of forward motion, of a man who believed answers were just around the next corner. Dear Annette, I flew into Managua today with medical supplies. There was a girl, maybe 10 years old, with your birthday. I gave her a candy bar and she smiled at me like I'd given her the world. Small things matter in dark places. I'm getting closer to finding you. The investigator says he has a new lead in Tacoma. By this time next year, your father. The 1980 seconds letters showed cracks in the optimism. The leads dried up. The investigators came back empty-handed. Howard's tone shifted from confident to uncertain, his questions more philosophical. Dear Annette, I wonder sometimes if I'm looking for you, or just looking. If finding you would mean the search ends, and then what would I be? A middle-aged pilot with a guilty conscience and no mission. Maybe the search is the mission. Maybe I'm more comfortable chasing than catching. That's a cowardly thought. But I'm trying to be honest with you, even if you never read this. By the 1990 seconds, the letters had changed again. Longer, more reflective, written by a man who understood he might never find what he was looking for. The letter from 1995 that Lowell had read before sat at the turning point, but there were others after it that went deeper still. Dear Annette, I'm 62 today, old enough to look back and see patterns. I've saved a lot of people, I can say that without false modesty. The missions, the unauthorized flights, the risks I took, lives saved. Children who grew up because I flew into places other pilots wouldn't go. But here's what I understand now. I was trying to save you over and over. Every child was you. Every refugee was a chance to rewrite the story where I walked away. It didn't work. Saving strangers doesn't unsave the one person who mattered. Maybe that's the point. Maybe redemption isn't possible, just the endless attempt at it. Another from 2001. Dear Annette, I've been thinking about your birth mother, Rebecca. She was 20, scared, alone. I was 19, equally scared, equally alone. We made a decision we thought was right, giving you to people who could provide stability. But was it right? Or was it just easy? I've never been able to answer that. Rebecca died in 1987, I found out recently. Car accident. She never married, never had other children. Did she think about you every day like I did? Did she carry the same weight? The later letters, from the 2000s and 2010 seconds, had the quality of someone speaking to a ghost, or perhaps to themselves. Dear Annette, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I'm 79 now. My hands shake. My vision's going. The missions ended years ago. I'm too old, too slow, too much of a liability. So I sit in this house, with all these photographs and all these memories of places you never were. I hope you've been happy. I hope your parents loved you. I hope you never felt the hole I felt. The absence that shaped everything. Maybe you're better off not knowing me. Maybe a mystery father is better than a real one who disappointed you. I loved you from a distance, which is maybe the same as not loving you at all. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lowell read the last letter 3 times, feeling the weight of Howard's regret like a physical presence in the room. This was the end point of a lifetime spent running from responsibility, from guilt, from the possibility of rejection. Howard had saved hundreds, but couldn't save himself from his own isolation. The parallel to Lowell's own life was unavoidable. Different circumstances, different choices, but the same fundamental failure: being present without being available, providing without connecting, loving without showing it in ways that mattered. His phone buzzed. Malcolm. Dad, I've been thinking about what we talked about. About doing better. Me too. I want to bring the boys up to visit. Maybe next month? They're on fall break from school. Lowell felt something loosen in his chest. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. And I was thinking maybe I should apologize for not being more understanding after Mom died. We were kids, but we could have been more patient with you. You were children dealing with grief. You didn't owe me patience. Maybe not. But we owed you more than we gave. We all just pulled away, made our own lives, left you behind. I let you go, Lowell said. I could have fought harder to stay connected. A pause on the line. So we all failed each other a little bit. Or we all did the best we could with what we had. Those aren't mutually exclusive, are they? No, Lowell said. I suppose they're not. They talked about the visit, about what the boys might enjoy doing, about the prop plane in the yard that Preston would want to explore, and the tools in the garage that Dylan might like to use. It was a practical conversation, but underneath it was something warmer, more real. After they hung up, Lowell called a number he'd found in Howard's papers. Eugene Polk answered on the third ring. This is Eugene. Mr. Polk, my name is Lowell Brantley. I sent you an email a few weeks ago about Howard Merrick. Right. The guy who bought Howard's place. You said you found his records. They talked for 40 minutes. Eugene had served with Howard in Vietnam, had flown relief missions with him in the 1,982nd. He spoke about Howard with affection and frustration, both a brilliant pilot, a complicated man, someone who couldn't sit still, couldn't accept peace. He was chasing something he'd never catch, Eugene said. We all knew it. His daughter. He talked about her sometimes, late at night after missions, how he'd walked away before she was born, how he spent his whole life trying to walk back. Did he ever come close to finding her? Once, maybe. Early 90s. He tracked down the adoptive parents' missionaries, I think, but they'd moved, records were sealed. He hit a wall. Eugene mentioned something Lowell hadn't known. Howard had compiled evidence of all the unauthorized missions, all the people saved. He'd submitted a petition to the military for recognition, not for himself, but for the crew members who'd risked their careers. Petition went nowhere, Eugene said. Bureaucracy, red tape. Howard died before it got anywhere. But he tried. He wanted those people honored, wanted the missions acknowledged as official humanitarian work instead of violations of protocol. After the call, Lowell sat in the study surrounded by evidence of Howard's life. The medals, the photographs, the flight logs. A man who'd saved so many but died alone. A father who'd loved from a distance and never closed the gap. Tomorrow, Lowell decided, he would write to Annie. Not to solve Howard's problem that couldn't be solved, but to honor his memory. To make sure someone knew that Howard Merrick had spent his life caring about a daughter he never met, and that had to count for something. It had to. Lowell was reorganizing the document boxes when he noticed the weight was wrong. The third box felt heavier than it should, given how few papers remained inside. He lifted out the contents, a handful of letters, some photographs, miscellaneous papers, and examined the box itself. The bottom shifted slightly when he pressed it. His pulse quickened. He'd seen this kind of thing before, false bottoms in old toolboxes and cases. People hid things, money, documents, items they didn't want easily found. He worked his fingers around the edge of the cardboard, finding the seam, and carefully pried it up. Underneath was a manila folder, military green, with a red stamp across the front, declassified, 2012. Inside was a mission report. The cover page was standard military format, dated November 1973, titled Operation Frequent Wind Precursor, Cambodia Evacuation Flight. The classification marking had been crossed out, replaced with the declassification date and authorization code. Lowell read slowly, his hands trembling slightly. The report detailed an unauthorized humanitarian flight on the 18th of November 1973. Captain Howard Merrick, piloting a Cessna 182, had flown into Cambodia during what was officially listed as a ceasefire, but was functionally active combat. His mission: evacuate American missionaries and Cambodian civilians who were at risk from advancing forces. The flight had been dangerous: engine trouble, ground fire, a landing on a damaged airstrip with minimal fuel remaining. The report noted that Captain Merrick had violated multiple protocols, exceeded aircraft weight limits, and operated without proper authorization. It also noted that he'd saved 43 lives. Attached to the report was a manifest, documented by Red Cross personnel upon arrival in Thailand. Names, ages, nationalities. Lowell scanned the list mechanically at first, his eyes moving down the page without much thought. Then, he stopped. His vision blurred slightly, and he had to read the line 3 times to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Foster, Annette M., age 6, American, daughter of Theodore and June Foster, missionaries. The room seemed to tilt. Lowell set the report down carefully, stood up, walked to the window, walked back, picked up the report again. Annette M. Foster, age 6, 1973. His mind raced through the math. Annette born March 1967, adopted April 1967. She would have been 6 years old in November 1973. Theodore and June Foster, the adoptive parents. Missionaries. He grabbed his laptop and searched frantically. Theodore Foster, June Foster, missionaries, Southeast Asia. The results came back quickly: articles from missionary newsletters, reports from religious organizations. Theodore and June Foster had worked in Cambodia from 1970 to 1973, teaching at a small school outside Phnom Penh. They'd evacuated in November 1973 as the situation deteriorated, returning permanently to the United States. Lowell pulled out the adoption records again. The information Phyllis had found. Adoptive parents, T. Foster and J. Foster. Tacoma, WA. It was them. It had to be them, which meant Howard Merrick had saved his own daughter and never knew it. The magnitude of it hit Lowell like a physical blow. He sat down heavily in the desk chair, the mission report still in his hands. Howard had flown into Cambodia to evacuate missionaries. Among those missionaries was a family with a 6-year-old daughter named Annette. Howard had loaded them onto his plane, flown them through dangerous airspace, landed with failing equipment, and delivered them safely to Thailand. He'd saved 43 people that day, including the daughter he'd been searching for since 1967, and he'd never known. Lowell read through the rest of the report with mounting emotion. The details of the flight painted a picture of extraordinary courage. Engine failure 30 minutes from the landing site. Ground fire that damaged the rudder. An emergency landing on a strip that was partially destroyed. Howard had kept the plane in the air through skill and determination, refusing to turn back, refusing to leave anyone behind. Among the additional documents was a Red Cross interview with one of the children, conducted a few days after the evacuation. The interviewer had asked the children about their experience, documenting their responses for psychological assessment. Annette Foster, age 6. The pilot was nice. He let me see the clouds. I was scared, but he told me it would be okay. He gave me his jacket because I was cold. He smelled like coffee and he had kind eyes. He told me to be brave and I was. Lowell read the words 3 times, his vision blurring with tears. Howard had comforted his own daughter during one of the most dangerous moments of his career, had given her his jacket, had told her to be brave, and he'd never known who she was. The cosmic irony of it was almost unbearable. Howard had spent decades flying missions to dangerous places, saving strangers, searching for redemption. And in one of those missions, he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. He'd been there for his daughter when she needed him most. He just hadn't known it. Would it have changed anything if he had known? Would the knowledge have healed him or haunted him even more? Would it have satisfied his need for redemption or deepened his regret about all the years between? Lowell didn't know. Nobody could know. But Annie had a right to know. Not just that her biological father had searched for her, not just that he'd loved her from a distance, but that he'd actually saved her life. That his heroism wasn't abstract or theoretical, it was concrete, documented, real. She'd been there, she'd experienced it. The nice pilot with kind eyes, who'd let her see the clouds and told her to be brave, was her biological father. The story had an ending after all, not the ending Howard had hoped for. He died without ever knowing, but an ending that gave meaning to all those years of searching. Lowell spent the rest of the evening reading and rereading the mission report. He found additional documentation tucked behind it, post-mission analysis, Howard's own written account of the flight, photographs of the damaged plane after landing. Howard's account was clinical, factual, focused on technical details. But there was one line at the end that caught Lowell's attention. The children handled the crisis better than expected. Their courage reminded me why some risks are worth taking. In the end, it's not about the protocols we follow but the lives we're able to save. If I'd followed proper authorization procedures, those 43 people would have died. I can live with a reprimand. I couldn't live with that. There was no mention of Annette specifically. No indication Howard had paid special attention to her or recognized anything familiar. She'd been one child among many, one life among 43. Important because all of them were important, not because of any special connection, which was, Lowell thought, perhaps the most profound part of the story. Howard hadn't saved his daughter because she was his daughter he hadn't known. He'd saved her because she was a child who needed saving, and that was enough. The purity of that motivated Lowell's decision. He would write to Annie tomorrow. He would tell her everything, the search, the letters, the missions, the Cambodia flight. He would give her the photograph of herself as an infant, the voice recordings of Howard's reflections, the mission report that documented the day her biological father saved her life without knowing it. She deserved to know. Howard deserved to be remembered. And the story deserved to be finished, even if it came decades too late. Lowell sat at Howard's desk for 3 days, composing and recomposing the letter to Annie. The first draft was too formal, reading like a legal document. The second was too emotional, drowning in sentiment. The third tried too hard to be casual and ended up sounding insane, a stranger claiming to have discovered her biological father's life story in a house he bought for $10. By the fourth draft, he'd found a tone that felt right, honest, compassionate, respectful of the choice he'd have to make about whether to engage with this information at all. He wrote it out by hand, on good paper he'd bought in town. Something about typing it felt wrong, too impersonal for what he was trying to communicate. Dear Mrs. Foster Gaines, my name is Lowell Brantley. I recently purchased a foreclosed property in rural Washington that belonged to a man named Captain Howard Allen Merrick, who passed away in 2018. In the process of settling into the house, I discovered a hidden compartment containing personal papers, letters, and recordings that Captain Merrick left behind. After considerable research and reflection, I believe you are the daughter he spent much of his life searching for. I know this must come as a shock, and I want to emphasize that you have no obligation to respond or engage with this information. I'm writing because I believe you have a right to know your biological father's story, and because that story is more extraordinary than either of us could have imagined. I've enclosed copies of several documents, including a photograph of you as an infant with your birth mother, and a declassified military report that I think you'll find significant. If you'd like to know more, I welcome the opportunity to meet and share what I've found. Captain Merrick's house and all his belongings are here, and you're welcome to visit whenever feels right for you. If you prefer not to pursue this, I understand completely and you'll hear nothing further from me. With respect, Lowell Brantley. He included his phone number and the mansion's address. Then he made copies of key documents, the infant photograph, the 1995 letter where Howard expressed his deepest regrets, and the Cambodia mission report with Annie's name on the manifest. He placed everything in a large envelope and drove to the post office to send it certified mail. The clerk, an older man with reading glasses, hefted the envelope. Important? Documents? Very important. To someone I've never met. Well, they'll get their safes. That's what certified's for. Lowell drove back to the mansion in a state of nervous anticipation. He'd done it. The letter was sent. Whatever happened next was out of his control. He threw himself into physical work to manage the anxiety. The study had become almost sacred space, but the rest of the house needed attention. He patched walls, replaced broken window panes, cleaned decades of grime from the hardwood floors. The work was meditative, requiring just enough focus to keep his mind from spinning in circles. In the evenings, he continued exploring Howard's belongings. He found books in a dozen languages, evidence of Howard's commitment to understanding the people he helped. Khmer grammar texts with notes in the margins. Vietnamese phrase books. Arabic vocabulary lists. A man who could have simply flown the planes had instead chosen to learn, to connect, to see the humanity in every mission. The workshop behind the house yielded more treasures. Aviation tools, parts for the Cessna, maintenance logs, showing Howard had kept the plane airworthy until at least 2010. After that, the entries stopped. Too old, probably, or too sick to fly anymore. Lowell examined the plane itself, walking around it in the autumn drizzle. The Cessna 182 was a reliable workhorse, the kind of plane bush pilots loved for its simplicity and durability. This one had been well maintained for decades, then left to wither and rust for the final years. Lowell could see where Howard had made modifications, extra fuel capacity, reinforced cargo area, upgraded instruments, a plane built for missions, not pleasure flights. 2 weeks after sending the letter, Jean called again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Howard's daughter," Jean said, "and about the petition he filed for mission recognition. I made some calls to people I know at the Pentagon. The petition's still in the system, just buried. With the right push, it could get reviewed." "What kind of push?" "Media attention, human interest story, veterans groups. If we can generate enough pressure, make it embarrassing for them to keep ignoring it, they'll have to respond. I don't know if that's something I should." "Howard saved over 200 people in unauthorized flights," Jean interrupted. "People who'd be dead if he'd followed protocol. He deserves recognition. His crew deserves recognition. Don't let bureaucracy win." Lowell promised to think about it. The conversation reminded him that Howard's story was bigger than just the search for Annie. It was about courage and conscience, about choosing what was right over what was easy. Malcolm called that evening with good news. He'd booked the trip for late November, 2 weeks away. Preston and Dylan were excited to see the mansion and the plane. Malcolm's wife, Patricia, wanted to come too. "Fair warning," Malcolm said. "The boys have a lot of questions about why Grandpa bought a house for $10. I have some answers for them. Not all good ones, but honest ones. That's all we can ask for." After they hung up, Lowell walked through the house, seeing it through his grandson's eyes. The proc plane would fascinate Preston. He could already imagine the questions about how it worked, where it had flown. The tools in the garage would appeal to Dylan, who Malcolm said was getting interested in building things. Maybe they could work on the Charger together. It would be a project, something to do with his hands alongside his grandson, passing down skills the way he'd tried to with Curtis all those years ago. The response from Annie arrived on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after he'd sent his letter. Lowell's hands shook as he opened the envelope, standing in the middle of the driveway where the mailman had handed it to him. The letter was handwritten, 2 pages on cream-colored stationery. Dear Mr. Brantley, I received your letter and have spent the past week processing the information you shared. I've always known I was adopted. My parents, Theodore and June Foster, were wonderful people who never hid that fact from me. They died years ago. And I've often wondered about my biological parents, but never felt quite right about searching. It seemed disloyal somehow. Your letter changes everything. The photograph of my birth mother, I have her smile, her hands. The mission report left me speechless. I have vague memories of that flight from Cambodia, of being frightened and cold, of a pilot who was kind to me. To learn that pilot was my biological father, I don't have words for what that means. I would very much like to meet you and see the house where my father lived. I need time to process this, to discuss it with my husband and children. Would 2 weeks from now work? I'll drive up from Bend. This is almost too much to believe, but I'm grateful you took the time to find me and tell me this story. Whatever happens, thank you. Sincerely, Annie Foster Gaines. Lowell read the letter 3 times, then walked back into the house and sat in the study for a long while, holding Annie's words and feeling the weight of what was about to happen. In 2 weeks, Howard Merrick's daughter would walk into this house. She would see her father's life laid out in photographs and letters and flight logs. She would hear his voice on the recordings. She would learn that the man who gave her up at birth had spent decades searching for her and had, without knowing it, saved her life. It was almost too much, too symmetrical, too meaningful. But it was real, it had happened, and now it was Lowell's responsibility to honor both Howard's memory and Annie's need for truth. He began preparing the study, organizing everything chronologically, so the story would unfold naturally. He cleaned the rest of the house more thoroughly, wanting it to feel welcoming rather than abandoned. He even worked on the yard, clearing some of the overgrowth, making paths through the wilderness. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, until the story found its ending. The day arrived cold and clear, late autumn pressing toward winter. Lowell had been awake since 5, checking and rechecking the study, making coffee he was too nervous to drink, straightening picture frames that didn't need straightening. He'd arranged Howard's documents on the desk in careful order, the flight log first, then the letters chronologically, then the photographs, and finally, the mission report. Each item told part of the story, and together they formed a narrative of love and loss and unexpected redemption. At 2 in the afternoon, a silver Honda pulled into the driveway. Lowell watched from the window as a woman climbed out of the passenger side, followed by a man from the driver's seat. Annie Foster Gaines was 58, average height, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a braid. She wore jeans and a fleece jacket, practical clothes for a long drive. But it was her face that stopped Lowell's breath, the bone structure, the set of her eyes, the way she looked at the mansion, with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She had Howard's eyes, the same thoughtful expression Lowell had seen in the flight photographs, the same quiet intensity. He opened the door before they reached the porch. Mrs. Foster Gaines. Annie, please. Her voice was soft, measured a hospice nurse's voice, trained to bring calm to difficult moments. This is my husband, Gerald. Gerald was tall and solid, with kind eyes and a protective stance beside his wife. They shook hands, the awkwardness of strangers meeting over profound circumstances. Thank you for coming, Lowell said. Please, come in. He gave them the tour slowly, letting Annie set the pace. She moved through the rooms quietly, touching door frames and windowsills, absorbing the space where her biological father had lived. The living room with its faded furniture and aviation photographs on the walls. The kitchen with maps still pinned above the table, marking places most people would never go. The hallway lined with more photographs, Howard with crews, Howard standing beside planes, Howard shaking hands with people in distant locations. He traveled so much, Annie said softly, studying a photo of Howard in front of a hangar somewhere tropical. He did. Humanitarian missions mostly. after he retired from the military. Always moving. Always somewhere else. There was no judgment in her voice, just observation. But Lowell heard the subtext, a man always somewhere else, couldn't be here, couldn't be present for the things that mattered. They reached the study and Annie stopped in the doorway. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes and the carefully arranged documents on the desk. This was the heart of it. The room where Howard had lived with his regrets and his memories. "This is where I found everything," Lowell said. "Behind that bookshelf, there's a hidden panel." Annie walked to the panel, now standing open, and ran her fingers along the edge. "He hid these things. I think he wanted them found, eventually. By someone, maybe by you." She turned to the desk, to the materials Lowell had laid out. Her hands hovered over the flight log before settling on it, opening to a random page. Howard's handwriting filled the pages, precise and disciplined. "May I?" she asked. "Everything here is yours, if you want it. I'm just a caretaker." Annie sat in Howard's chair and began reading. Gerald stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. Lowell excused himself to make tea, giving them privacy for the first reading. When he returned 20 minutes later, Annie had moved to the letters. She was crying quietly, tears running down her face as she read her father's words from decades past. Gerald had pulled up another chair beside her, reading over her shoulder. Lowell set the tea on the desk and moved to leave, but Annie looked up. "Stay. Please. You're part of this story too." So, he sat in the third chair and waited while she read. He watched her face as she moved through the progression of letters, seeing her expression shift from sadness to something more complex. Grief for what was lost, anger perhaps at the choice made, understanding creeping in around the edges. She picked up the photograph of herself as an infant, held by Rebecca. She looked so young, 20 years old, according to Howard's notes. Just a girl, really. Making an impossible choice. Annie set the photograph down carefully. "My parents, the Fosters, they told me my birth mother loved me very much, that giving me up was the hardest thing she'd ever done. I used to imagine her, wonder what she looked like." A pause. "I have her smile." "You do. And his eyes." She picked up one of the flight photos, holding it next to her face. "People must have told him that. When I was a baby, they must have said she has your eyes." Gerald squeezed her shoulder. Annie took a shaky breath and picked up the mission report. She read the cover page, her brow furrowing. "Cambodia evacuation, 1973. She looked at Lowell. "I was there. I remember being in Cambodia. We left in a hurry. I didn't understand why. My parents were scared but trying not to show it. The manifest is on page 3. Annie flipped pages, scanning the list. When she found her name, she went very still. Foster. Annette M. Age 6. Her voice was barely a whisper. American, daughter of Theodore and June Foster, missionaries. She read it again. And again. Then looked up at Lowell with something like shock in her eyes. "He saved me? My father, my biological father. He flew that mission?" "He did, the 18th of November 1973. He flew into Cambodia without proper authorization, evacuated 43 people including your family, and flew you all to safety in Thailand. Engine trouble, ground fire, emergency landing. He nearly died getting you out. But he didn't know. He didn't know I was his daughter. No. I don't think he ever knew." Annie set the report down with trembling hands. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the Cessna in the yard. Gerald followed her, his arm around her waist. "That plane?" she asked. "The same one, I believe, or one very like it. I remember it. I remember." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "There was a pilot who gave me his jacket. I was cold and crying and he wrapped his jacket around me. He told me to look at the clouds, to be brave. He smelled like coffee and had gentle hands." Her voice broke, That was him. That was my father. And I didn't know. He didn't know. Annie stood at the window for a long time, her husband beside her, both of them silent. Lowell waited, understanding that some moments needed space. Finally, she turned back to the desk. You mentioned recordings in your letter. 3 tapes, voice recordings Howard made, reflections on his missions and his life. I haven't played the third one yet. I was waiting. For me, it seemed right. Annie returned to the chair, Gerald pulling his seat closer. Lowell retrieved the old reel-to-reel player from the shelf and loaded the third tape, the one he'd saved. His hands were steady now, purpose overriding nervousness. This is dated 1989, he said. 22 years after you were born. He pressed play. Static crackled, then cleared. Howard Merrick's voice filled the study, older than in the previous recordings, worn but peaceful. November 1989. I'm 52 years old today, and I'm tired. Not physically, though my back aches and my hands aren't as steady as they were. Tired of searching, tired of hoping, tired of carrying this weight. Annie leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the tape player, as if she could see her father through it. I've spent 22 years looking for you, Annette. 22 years of private investigators and sealed records and doors that won't open. I've flown to every corner of the world, saved hundreds of lives, and I still can't find the one person I need to find. Maybe that's the universe telling me something. Maybe you don't need to be found. Maybe you're happy somewhere, living a good life, and my showing up would only complicate things. A long pause. The sound of breathing. I've been thinking about what it means to be a father. I walked away before you were born because I was 19 and terrified. Your mother was 20 and braver than both of us. She held you, named you, and then made the choice to give you to people who could provide what we couldn't. I've spent half my life trying to prove I'm not the coward who ran away. But maybe the running away was the bravest thing I did. Maybe knowing I couldn't be what you needed was more honest than staying and failing you. Annie's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Every mission I fly, every child I help evacuate from danger, I wonder if they're like you. I wonder if you're safe somewhere, if you're loved, if you know how to be brave. I hope your parents taught you that. I hope they gave you everything I couldn't. In a way, every child I save is you. Every frightened face looking up from a refugee camp or a disaster zone, that's you at 6 or 10 or 15. I can't save you because you don't need saving, but I can save them. Maybe that's enough. Maybe redemption isn't about fixing what we broke. Maybe it's about preventing the next thing from breaking. Howard's voice grew softer. Annette, if you ever hear this, know that I thought of you every single day. Not with regret. Exactly, though there's plenty of that, but with love. A father's love from a distance, which is maybe the same as not loving you at all, but it's what I have to offer. I hope you've been happy. I hope you've had a good life. That's all any father can really want for his child. And maybe, in some small way, the work I've done has made the world a little safer for you, even if we never meet. Another pause, longer this time. I'm going to stop searching now, not because I don't care, but because caring doesn't mean chasing. Sometimes love means letting go. You're 52 years old somewhere, living your life. I'm 52 years old here, learning to live with mine. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. A click. Silence. The tape ran on. Empty leader, spinning through the player. Finally, Lowell reached over and stopped it. Annie was weeping openly now, Gerald holding her. The sound of her crying filled the study, not harsh sobs, but the deep, wrenching grief of a loss she'd never known she had. He gave up, she said finally. He stopped looking. He accepted, Lowell said gently. There's a difference. But I was right here. I was in Bend, just a few hours away. If he'd kept searching, if he'd tried a little harder, you might not have wanted to be found. He was right about that. You had parents you loved. A good life. His showing up might have only complicated things. Annie wiped her eyes. I wish I could tell him. About my life, about who I became. I wish he could know that I'm okay, that his worries were right. I was loved. I was happy. He knew, Gerald said quietly. In his heart, he knew. That's why he could let go. They sat in silence for a while. Then Annie asked, what about the Cambodia flight? When was that? Lowell consulted the mission report. November 1973, 14 years before that recording. So he saved me, flew me to safety, never knew who I was, and then spent another 16 years searching. Annie laughed, a short, broken sound. The cosmic irony of it, or cosmic grace, Lowell offered. He got to be your father when it mattered most. You needed saving, and he saved you. You needed comfort, and he comforted you. The fact that he didn't know, maybe, that makes it more pure. He helped you because you needed help, not because of biology. Annie picked up the mission report again, reading the section about the flight. Her finger traced the description of Howard's actions, the engine trouble, the ground fire, the emergency landing. He risked everything for that mission, for those 43 people, including you, including me. She looked at Lowell. Why did you do this? Why did you search for me? Finish his story. Lowell thought about his own children, about the distances he'd let grow, about Howard's letters and the lessons in them. Because some stories deserve to be finished, he said, and because I saw myself in him, a father who loved but couldn't connect. He never got the chance to fix that. I still do. Annie reached across the desk and took his hand. Then fix it, she said. Don't make his mistakes. Don't wait until it's too late. 3 months later, the mansion looked different. Not restored exactly, that would take years and more money than Lowell had, but alive. The porch no longer sagged. The broken windows were replaced. The yard had been cleared enough to see the property's bones, the way it might have looked when Howard first bought it decades ago. Spring had arrived early, bringing green to the pines and wildflowers to the cleared spaces. The Cessna still sat in the front yard, but now it was cleaned and painted, a monument rather than a relic. The Charger sat beside it, hood up, tools scattered around it, where Lowell and his grandson Dylan had been working. Today both families were gathering, Lowell's children and grandchildren, and Annie's family. 15 people in total, connected by the story of a man none of them had known, but who had shaped all their lives. Lowell stood on the porch, watching cars arrive. Malcolm first, with Patricia and the boys. Preston jumped out and ran straight to the plane, Dylan following more slowly, already scanning the Charger's engine with the critical eye of a young mechanic learning his craft. Diane arrived next, looking less harried than usual. Her daughter, Claire, was 12, and immediately drawn to the wildflowers blooming in the yard. Curtis came last, the twins tumbling out of the car in a chaos of energy and questions. "Grandpa!" they shouted in unison, and Lowell felt his throat tighten. When had they started calling him Grandpa instead of the formal grandfather their parents had taught them? Annie's car pulled in as Lowell was hugging his grandchildren. She emerged with Gerald, followed by her 3 adult children and their families. 7 grandchildren total between them, ranging from 3 to 15 years old. The adults shook hands and made introductions. The children, in that magical way children have, simply started playing together as if they'd known each other forever. "Welcome," Lowell said to everyone. "Come inside. There's a lot to see." He'd prepared the study carefully, creating a memorial to Howard. The photographs were properly framed now, hung in chronological order, showing Howard's progression from young pilot to weathered veteran. The flight logs were displayed in a glass case Lowell had built. The letters, some of them were framed as well. Howard's words preserved behind glass. And on the desk, in a place of honor, sat the mission report and the photograph of infant Annette with her mother. Annie's children gathered around these items, reading their grandfather's words for the first time. Lowell watched their faces as they absorbed the story, the search, the missions, the Cambodia flight where Howard had unknowingly saved their mother. "This is incredible," Annie's oldest son said. "He was a hero. He was complicated," Annie corrected gently. "Heroes usually are." Malcolm stood beside Lowell, looking at the displays. "You did all this? It needed doing. His story needed telling. And what about your story, Dad?" "What are you telling?" Lowell looked at his son. "I'm still figuring that out, but I know it doesn't end with me alone in this house." They moved outside for the barbecue. Gerald and Curtis worked the grill, trading stories about their wives and finding common ground in the bewilderment of loving, strong women. The children played elaborate games, involving the prop plane and the charger, their imagination turning the yard into an adventure. Diane approached Lowell as he was setting out plates. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "I do. When you bought this place, I thought you were having some kind of crisis, running away from us. Maybe I was. A little. But you weren't running away. You were running towards something. Understanding, maybe. Or purpose." "I found both," Lowell admitted, "in a dead man's story, and a daughter who needed to know she was loved." Diane looked across the yard at Annie, who was laughing at something one of the children had said. "She seems wonderful." "She is. She became everything Howard hoped she would. She helps people at the end of their lives, gives them dignity and comfort. In a way, she continued his mission without knowing it." "Do you think he'd be proud?" "I think he'd be grateful. And humbled. And probably still guilty. Because that's what fathers do, carry guilt, for all the ways we fail our children." Diane touched his arm. "You didn't fail us, Dad. You were there, maybe not perfectly. But you were there." Later, as the sun angled toward evening, everyone gathered on the porch. The adults sat in chairs Lowell had borrowed and repaired, the children sprawled on the steps and lawn. Annie stood and cleared her throat. "I want to thank Lowell for bringing us all together," she said. "For finishing my father's story. For making sure Howard Merrick's life meant something beyond the missions he flew." She held up a letter that had arrived that morning. "The military has approved the petition for recognition. In June, there will be a ceremony at Arlington. Howard and his crew will be honored for the humanitarian missions they flew. More than 200 lives, saved over 2 decades of service." Applause broke out. Annie waited for it to quiet. "But more than that, I'm grateful for this." She gestured at the gathering, both families together. "My father spent his life searching for connection and never found it. But his story brought all of us here. It reminded us what matters. It gave us a second chance to get it right." She looked at Lowell. "He would have liked you. You're both men who understand that it's never too late to finish what you started." As evening settled, Lowell watched the families mingle, his grandchildren teaching Annie's grandchildren a game, his children laughing with hers. Malcolm and Annie deep in conversation about fatherhood and forgiveness. The mansion glowed with light from every window. The Cessna stood watch in the yard, and somewhere in the study, Howard Merrick's voice waited on tape for the next person who needed to hear that love, even imperfect and distant, still counted for something. Lowell thought about the lonely man who'd sat at that desk writing letters that were never sent, and he thought about the gathering on his porch, proof that no story was ever truly finished, that every ending could become a beginning if someone cared enough to see it through. Sometimes, the houses we buy for $10 are really buying us time to become who we needed to be all along.